Good afternoon and welcome to BizTech's Asian Midday Market Watch. David Kuo, founder of The Smart Investor, is our regular guest on Thursday, and he's here today as well. David, good afternoon.
Selamat tengah hari, Brian.
Selamat tengah hari. Now, great to have you on the show, David. I'm going to get back and get your insights on a couple of key issues. But first, let's take a look at how crypto markets are performing and also how regional stock markets have fared in the first half of the day. We've got Bitcoin, which is just over the 20,000 mark. It's 20,053 now. It's down 1.64%. Ethereum is at 1,606.88. It's down 0.89%. Now, looking across the regional stock markets, we've got the Straits Times Index in Singapore, which is up 0.44%. Bursa Malaysia is up 0.17%. Shanghai is down 1.07%. The Nikkei is, the ASX ordinaries is up 0.25%. The Nikkei is up 0.23%. The Hang Seng is up 0.28%. And rounding up the numbers, we've got the Kospi, which is down 0.13%. Pretty mixed bag, David. Tell us why.
Well, I think you can probably sort of sum it up with the exception of China as being everybody sitting on their hands at the moment. And I think we all know, and we'll be talking about this a little later, why everyone is sitting on their hands. China's got problems of its own. There is definitely a slowdown going on in China. And people are just wondering what is going to happen to the zero COVID strategy. But with regards to the rest of the market, Brian, I think everybody is waiting for the big event next week.
Absolutely. So, I think the big thing is obviously the Fed meeting next week. But will it be, I think, and the market is wondering, 50 basis points on the low side, 75 basis points, which is a consensus among the majority right now, or the unthinkable 100 basis points rise from the Fed. What are your views, David?
Well, some of the clues probably came from Jay Powell himself, who said that the next rate hike would probably be an outsized rate hike. I think we've all become very comfortable with 75 basis point rate hike. So is that outsized anymore? Well, about 1 in 5 people think that outsized could actually mean 100 basis points. I think we all know that the Federal Reserve is determined to tamp down on inflation. And I find it kind of amusing over the last 3 or 4 weeks to hear all these commentators out there trying to pick little scintillas of data points and say, oh, it looks as though inflation is slowing down. No, it's not, Brian. Inflation is not slowing down. And the Federal Reserve has a big job on its hands. I think we can cross off 25 basis points. That's not going to happen. 50, I think that's going to be very unlikely. So I think the choice is between 75 or even 100 basis points. And if he is really determined to control inflation, he really needs to bring down asset prices. And by assets, I'm not talking only about the stock market. I'm talking about all asset prices, because people in America still feel quite comfortable at the moment because their house prices are still quite strong. And as long as that is going to happen, that wealth effect will trickle down and the people will think, oh, I can carry on spending because my house is worth over $1 million at the moment.
So, David, then, how is a potential outsized rate hike of 1% going to have on the rest of the world? Because I'm going to take a pick through a few data points from this morning. Now, the Japanese yen is among the worst performing Asian currencies right now. And this came after the country logged a record trade deficit for August. So that's one barometer in terms of Japan and the yen. Second barometer is Australia. So Australia's unemployment rate for August came in at 3.5%. Now that's slightly higher than July. Now the Australian consumer is stressed with mortgages. So, so that's going to have that any 1% rate hike from the Fed is probably going to be followed by Reserve Bank of Australia movement. How are these two economy is going to react to an outsized rate hike?
Well, I think they have a couple of things to consider. The first one, of course, is the health of the economy itself. And then the other one is the relative value of their currencies compared to the US dollar. If the US government or the US Federal Reserve continues to hike interest rates, this term mighty dollar is going to become a super mighty dollar because everybody will just simply pile into the US dollar. So what are these other economies going to do? I mean, for instance, you have a look at what's going on in Europe, and the ECB says, oh, they're going to increase interest rates by a quarter point. Are you kidding me? A quarter point when inflation is running at 9%? I mean, be serious. So I think each economy has to look at its own problems, its own issues, and say, what do we do? Do we just simply sit on our hands and try and drive economic growth in the way that China has been doing, trying to ease monetary policy, or in the case of Japan, ease monetary policy? Eventually, what will happen is that they'll look at their currency and say, my goodness, it's going to cost us so much to import stuff because the dollar is so strong. And in the case of Japan, it is going to be a problem. Maybe less so in the case of Australia, because a lot of the stuff they sell is based in US dollars anyway. So is the problem going to be when China slows down and then few of those things that they dig out from the ground is going to be wanted by China? Is that going to be a problem for them? So I think the simple answer, after rambling for about sort of 2 or 3 minutes, Brian, is I don't know. And I think the more people they say, I don't know, the better it will be.
Okay, now let's move on to something that perhaps you will know or have as a value investor for so many years. Now, Starbucks has jumped 6% on an upbeat forecast for revenue and earnings by Howard Schultz. Now, he's turned around the fortunes of the coffee chain. The eternal question is often now, in terms of value stocks and the long-term share investor, should investors back the horse or the jockey?
Well, what a great question. And I think that this is something that many value investors wrestle over. And I think in the case of Starbucks, when we saw the Starbucks share price fall before Howard Schultz took over and Kevin Johnson was in charge, we saw the share price gradually decline. Then it sort of fell quite sharply, and then people were very worried. And they said, what would be the catalyst that would actually see a rebound in the fortunes of the company? And sometimes the catalyst is something that happens within the company. Maybe the price to book ratio, maybe the growth figures are much better than expected, and then the share price recovers. But in the case of Starbucks, it was that secret ingredient. It was the return of Howard Schultz. He came back, and then the share price started to recover. So the eternal question, I think, isn't so much in terms of value investing, but when you are investing in a company, do you back the horse or do you back the jockey, right? And this is one of those things. Starbucks is a wonderful company, but if somebody were to put either you and I are in charge of this fantastic company, would we do as good a job as Howard Schultz?
Probably not.
Wait, speak for yourself, Brian. Yeah, I mean, but I think in my case, probably not also. I don't think we have coffee in our blood. We don't have the love of that company. And in that sense, Howard Schultz is something very, very special. And despite the fact that you have a good horse, you also need a very good jockey. But if you put Howard Schultz in charge of something else, would he be able to do as good a job? I think this is one of those questions that we would probably not be able to answer, because if you put Howard Schultz, say, in charge of Malaysia Airlines, would he be able to turn around the airlines, Brian? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. Has he got airlines in his blood the same way as any chief executive that lives and breathes the airline industry? Would he be able to turn it around? Some people might say, yes, it doesn't matter what he runs, he'll be fine. Others will say, no, I don't think that's going to happen. So I think it's not a question of picking the horse or the jockey. You need to pick the right jockey for the right horse.
Now, I want to use another example, which we were just speaking about before the show. Olam is a great company. It's run by a guy called Sunny Varghese. You mentioned that. You're an investor. It's backed by Temasek.
Yeah.
Isn't that a similar example as well?
I think so. I think so. I think it is because Sonny lives and breathes Olam, right? He lives and breathes that particular industry. And so if you are looking at a company like Olam, and I know they had some issues a few years back when a shorter out there shorted the shares, and they said there was something wrong with the accounts. It turned out there was nothing really that wrong with the accounts at all. I mean, they were just following accounting procedure. But Sonny stood his ground. He turned around the company, and it is a wonderful company at the moment. So, but if you put Sonny in charge of Starbucks, would he be able to do as good a job? And I think the answer is probably not. And if you put Howard Schultz in charge of Olam, would he be able to do as good a job as Sonny? The answer is, I don't think so. And I think it really goes back to what I said. You need to pick the right jockey for the right horse. And if you do, that finishing line is in sight.
Now, on that note, David, thank you very much for your insights, and thanks for coming on the show today.
Thank you.
Now, we've been speaking to David Kuo, founder of the Smart Investor out of Singapore, on BizTech's Asian Midday Market Watch. I'm Brian Fernandez. This video will be on our website, www.biztech.asia, as well as our social media platforms. It will also be on our syndication partners, TV stations, radio stations, and websites. Thank you very much for tuning in.